So yes, it's safe to say we have nothing to say to each other after spending so much time together. But no, man, yeah, it was something. Gav, you had a good time.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't know what my expectations were, but whatever they were, it was exceeded like by what happened. I mean, it's really surreal. It's almost hard to describe because players live in this world where people recognize them, and this is just an extension for them when they are honored of what they've been going through their whole life. When they walk down the street, they get stopped. But when you're a writer and you receive the amount of attention that I received, and previous award winners, I know Eric can speak to this as well. Like, first of all, pucks start arriving in the mail for you to sign. The first
Yeah,
indication,
really.
the first indication that something is completely different than what's going on, and with specific instructions on how they're to be signed,
Yep.
and then when I show up that night, there's people there with my picture to sign, and also my picture to figure out who I am. And then they have me sign books, and they have me sign 4 or 5 things, and again, specific instructions on how to sign. But what made me feel good is they, for our profession is one of the guys said, I've been doing this for a long time, and I like to ask the reporters for their autograph because A, they're so nice about doing it, and B, he said it's legible. He said, you can actually see who it is that signed. And I said, well, it's because we rarely have to sign for any reason. So, we try to make it nice. But the other thing that was fun, too, is, and again, you don't really have this happen to you. But after the television broadcast where Pat Foley and I were asked to stand up, I mean, obviously everybody at the party, even those who were not where the speeches were being given, they all saw what was going on. So suddenly now I'm a face, and as I'm walking back down the red carpet, as I'm walking by, I can hear people whispering, "Oh, that's the writer. That's the writer." So all of a sudden I had some kind of status. I was the writer. So anyway, mostly it was just fun. JD John Davidson had said to me going in that what he discovered is that this was even bigger for his family than it even was for him, and that would be my observation as well. Like for my family, this was just so much fun. I'm in my environment, they're with me. People are chatting with them, and it's just they just see me under different contexts, and
That
for
is
us,
the
it really,
strangest thing, right? That is the
yeah,
strangest thing, having your family in that environment. Even for me, I just had my wife with me, but even having her in that environment was so peculiar.
yeah.
Just, we're just she's never there. I mean, she would never be around these people.
Yeah. Well, and the other added element to for us is that we were very much a sports family. My kids were all athletes, and so we had the minivan, that was loaded up full of gear, and we were always going to this and that. Well, my kids are all adults now, and 2 of them live in different states. But the plan was, and I don't even remember who came up with the plan. The plan was instead of flying all directly to Toronto, they all came to Michigan, and then we rented a minivan because we sure as heck don't own one anymore, and we all crammed in and drove to Toronto in the minivan as a family. And it's just like old times, just goofy conversations and stuff. So, you know, I just can't even. It's almost indescribable,
I want to address your family because your family is amazing. Okay, and just hanging out with them for three meals, sort of. So it was just, first of all, they're hearty. They are. We walked to the luncheon yesterday when you were actually, or no, 2 days ago now it was when you guys actually both gave your when you introduced America and Kevin when you gave your speech, and we got up in the morning and we met them in the lobby. And so this is it feels like 3 daughters, your 2 daughters, your daughter-in-law and your son.
yeah, she's like a daughter. Yeah,
And there's, okay, we're gonna walk over, and we had no idea because I was meeting somebody. It's the first time I really to go with them. Just didn't know where it was. Like normally I would know exactly where I was going, but now we're meeting them. So they're like, oh, we'll walk over. I'm like, great, no problem. So we start walking, and it's like a couple blocks. It's like a good 6, 7 blocks in a driving, cold, wet snow. And I'm like, this is Midwestern girls. This is, you gotta like. I mean, this is impressive. I mean,
yeah. No, that's right.
it's not like, if I had done this, if I had just told Jody, like, we're gonna just walk, and we had done it by ourselves, I would have been slayed because you made me walk this in the snow, all dressed. I mean, my daughter went to Cornell, and she's an athlete, and she's tough, but still, she's got that frizzy hair in the rain that she would like have killed me, right? So I'm like, but she was impressed. We were all like, wow, you guys are something. That was awesome, and they just are so down to earth, and they're all doing such great things with their lives. I said I feel like I should volunteer at a soup kitchen this weekend, Joe. I said we got to do something. These guys are just, and your wife's the same way. I mean, I can see why, and I will vouch for the fact that this was huge for them, because during the ceremony, when you were actually the actual ceremony, I was sitting with all of them. Every time your name was mentioned by the TV, it was like, there was a big cheering section, and they were just, and when you actually came up and they had a little montage and they showed your picture, they were in awe. They were all fired up. It was fun to watch.
Yeah, well, yeah, that was the one part of my speech that I really wanted to get out, and that was when I was quite emotional, as you all recall. But my point is that I'm out in the fun and games department, living the dream, but really just doing something that is fun for me. And meanwhile, my kids, I have two teachers, someone in public health who works for the state of South Carolina, dealing with making sure that disadvantaged mothers have the proper nutrition when they're with their young babies and so forth. And my son is a occupational therapist dealing with early intervention for 2- and 3-year-olds. I mean, they're putting it into society. I take from society. so anyway, I'm quite proud of them, and I wanted that to come across. And with regard to what I like best about the television is the one photo that I really, really like in my life was the one because it kind of merges the two things that are important in my life: my career and my family. My family is obviously more important, but it was taken 30 years ago, or be 20 some years ago. It's me and my daughter, and I had gone into work, and of course I had to take a call when I was in at work. So I'm holding my daughter, and who was 2, and I'm on the phone. Well, that pretty much just sums up my life. So family work is pretty much all I do. But I don't know. Let's do some hockey.
I think hockey, I'll stop embarrassing you. It was just awesome, and there were some great moments. You got to watch the speech. I actually spent last night fixing the audio on the speech, making it better. And I'm sorry that during the whole filming of it, I actually started cutting off Eric as I was going on YouTube, because I was hoping, and this is why I did it, because fortunately, it didn't just cut off you. I don't know how I got that lucky, because I should have been cutting off you as well. But what I was doing is, like, you feel embarrassed in a place like this to be holding your phone up like this, I had it on my knee, and I was tilting it up like this, and I was trying to make sure I had it okay, but I had most of it good. But I fixed the audio because I could, and I'm gonna post it back up again, and it'll look a lot better. So, but I've gotten so many comments about it already, so people loved it, and Eric, you did a great job introducing him as well.
Thanks. Yeah, my girlfriend saw that, and she said, "Wow, it looks like the Zapruder film there."
I know.
I was not on the grassy knoll.
I know. It's like I didn't know, I've got to the left of me, understand, like, the whole NHL, right? Bettman, Daly, the whole guys who think of me as a blogger anyway, and I'm holding up a camera, video. It felt like I was like, I'm just like, I really wanted to get this out there.
You have no idea that you
and I. They were prepared to let that go, They were prepared to let that go. The one thing I always sit at that head table, because I generally make the introductions every year, and I give both Gary Bettman and Bill Daly credit. They get there every year and sit there, and they're busy. They're in Toronto for conferences, for meetings, and general managers the next day. Remember one time Gary Bettman saying that he is so heavily scheduled that his day is broken up into 15-minute segments. It's a bit like being the president of the United States. The Girl Scouts of America come, they got 15 minutes, maybe. And that's how heavily scheduled his day is. So he was there, and he was sitting between Lisa Dillman from the Los Angeles Times was sitting between the two of us, and we're fencing back and forth with him because Gary really does like to trade barbs with the writers. He's a very intelligent man who and quite witty. So he's a test of your wills. I love fencing with Gary Bettman. I think he likes fencing with me too. And so at the end of it, he's up there shaking hands, and when I was going to New York to have a one-on-one with him about a week later, and I turned to Lisa and I said, Gary Bettman just gave us 6 15-minute segments, 6 of them, to attend this. So that's pretty good, and I got a big laugh out of Gary. So.
Awesome. I wanted to add one more thing about it because it reminded me. I actually sent a note to Bill and Gary this morning, just saying the same thing, Eric. That I've been to a few of those as well, and I've sat at that table when I've introduced people, and I've always been impressed by the fact they've made an effort to get there. Because that's sort of a luncheon that's kind of squeezed in between some pretty big events there, and there's meetings that go on as well. There was a World Cup meeting that went on at the Hall of Fame at that point as well. But the one story I didn't tell in my speech, and I'll tell it here, and I'll tell you why I didn't talk about it. I originally was going to put it in, and that is, when my daughter was very ill, and she was she was a student in Ecuador. She was studying abroad, and she contracted a real difficult illness called aplastic anemia, and she really had bottomed out. It was life-threatening. It was certainly the most difficult time in my life, and she had to be airlifted back from Ecuador, and because of insurance reasons, they would only take her as far as Miami, and so my wife, who are facing the parents' worst nightmare of having a child who's seriously ill, fly down to Florida, and we don't really know anybody in Florida. So, we're going to this hospital. The doctors are totally unknown. It's the middle of the night. Our daughter's being airlifted. We don't even know how she's going to look. And we get in there, and she's examined, and the diagnosis is confirmed, and we're facing a real struggle. And they really don't even have a room for her. So we, at some point early in that morning, we get up and we're in the room, and not only do we have a room, but we have a suite, and a suite in terms of it's just a bigger room. It's the the corner room and all that. I mean, it's still a hospital, but anyway, we're in there, and we're in there about 30 seconds, and the phone rings. It's 8 o'clock in the morning, and the first person who reached me after all that was Gary Bettman, and what he said was, I've heard about what's going on. He said, I know there's not anything we can do, but he said, what I did do is I called the Florida Panthers and asked them to at least call the hospital and say, hey, he's a friend of the National Hockey League. He covers it. So, I just will always remember that the first person that, reached out to me, and, and again, I mean, it was just it's not that we're friends, but, I've been covering him for his entire time he's been at the NHL, and I will never forget that. I remember later on one of the I think one of the orderlies came in, and we just had tons of flowers and things from teams, and just little gifts and candies and so forth. And he said, who are you guys? You guys must be somebody. And I said, well, we're really not anybody. He said, I said, we're not really anybody, but I know a lot of somebody. Yeah. That was the point. So anyway, I didn't mention that because I decided not to, my daughter's in remission, things are going well. I didn't want it to be about her, to remind her at that point about all that, so I decided not to mention it. But I did think about Gary when I was making that speech because, at that time in my life, the fact that he called me was very meaningful.
She's doing amazingly well, and what a great story. I mean, what a great, and I'm really glad you shared it on this show because I want to get more Gary Bettman stories out like that, in general, because there are so many stories, and they're not publicized. They're never publicized. He's not the kind to publicize them, and he's a much better person than people realize. I
agree with Eric. I mean, I find Gary quite entertaining, to be honest, and I have a similar style of relationship. We've talked before. He and I have disagreed on a couple of issues. The biggest one I remember was the whole ESPN deal, where I thought, you're really not a sport unless you're on ESPN, and Gary disagreed with that, and it turned out he was right. But we had some back and forth on that. And what I like about him is, even if you disagree with them, it's not the end of the world. There's a lot of guys in this business that it gets tough. You write a column, they don't like it, and then they get mad.
Right.
Batman has never been like that.
It could be so much worse. They could be such a, when you think about it, I mean, he's such a great president compared to, what we could what you could have. You can sit there and talk to him. It's an amazing thing.
Yeah, no. So I mean, he basically tells you you're wrong, and
Right.
and you debate it a little bit. But next time I talk to him, he doesn't hold it against you, or and even in the times when I've been right, it's okay. We just all kind of get along. But he's a, he's a lightning rod for criticism for a variety of reasons. I think it's the nature of that position. All the commissioners in the United States get booed. And they because of the lockouts, he gets more shots. I also think, even though he's a brilliant man, and I think you see his brilliance, like when he has to the appeals, like when you read his brief on the appeals, like you're reminded what a brilliant lawyer
Right.
he was when he was practicing, because they're so well constructed and the arguments are so well reasoned. But I also think he has this air about him that he's not the perfect media or public relations commissioner. He doesn't come across as well in public speaking. One-on-one he's better, and that's not anybody's fault. I mean, all of us have strengths and weaknesses, and he is not the best at he doesn't come across as warm and fuzzy.
He's much better one-on-one. I'm sure, Eric, could you describe Eric?
Yeah, well, a couple of Gary Bettman stories. One, I remember the year before the lockout, I was in Anaheim, and Bettman was doing a tour. So he ends up in, I think it was Samueli's private box, invited to go down and talk to him. And I thought to myself, and he, at that point, it was like, we're not talking about collective bargaining negotiations. That's the official policy. And there is no one better than Gary Bettman than staying on message. So you have to, a lot of interviews you go in, Kevin and I have talked about this before, you try to turn them into conversations, because when you turn it into a conversation, people are more relaxed and you get better anecdotes. But when you're preparing to interview Gary, you have to think about how to ask the question. And Gary knows that I do that, and he knows that there's traps there. So he's great. Like if you just ask him, his staff will brief him, and these are the 20 questions that will come up, and you can tell at his press conference, here comes the question about the World Cup on message. Here comes the question about the Olympics on message. So I forget exactly how I did. I actually wrote the question out, and he knew as soon as I asked that where I was going, but he also recognized intuitively that there was a trap there. So he has this technique where he starts to give your answer back to you, and he's working it out. It's as if he's a cartoon character, and the light bulb is there over his head, and you can see the machinations there. He's working it out. He comes up with the solution, detours the question, answers it, gets on the message that he wants to give, gives you an answer, and then he paused for a second, turned to me and said, "Nice try, though." That's great. That's great. That's Gary Bettman. And you know what? You nod your head in agreement. Okay, I did my best, and I had him thinking there for a minute, but he wouldn't go where I wanted him to go. He knew that there was danger there, so he turned it a different way, and eventually he escaped the maze. And it was pretty much a non-answer that was unusable or boilerplate or whatever you want to call it. But here's one more. You want a funny Gary Bettman story?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, the draft in Florida. I forget what year that was. We were staying way away from where the actual draft was. The draft is such an event that it's difficult for some cities to host it because they don't have the hotel space. The draft is different than the Stanley Cup Final. The Stanley Cup Final, it's 2 teams, their entourages, a bunch of writers and broadcasters. The draft is 30 teams. It's athletes, agents, families. I mean, you need a lot more hotels for the draft. Anyway, we're out in the middle of nowhere, but we're staying at a real nice resort, and they've got a spa. And all of us in the computer business have issues with our necks, our backs, our arms, because we spend too much time in front of the computer and too much time with our BlackBerries. Gary Bettman is no different. And so I book a massage, and you go into this fancy spa, and they hand you a robe, and you sit down and you wait there in the foyer until your massage therapist comes in and calls you. So I'm there waiting, flipping through a magazine. Gary Bettman is coming here with a white robe and and he's with his massage therapist. So we're there, a little uncomfortable, but not, if it was anybody else, you'd just exchange pleasantries and small talk, and then you'd wait, and away you go. So what we ended up doing, we started to compare symptoms, and we started to compare lives. I've got it here, well, I got it there, and then, our fingers are so. So finally, at the end of this, and it becomes almost one-upsmanship. I finally nodded and said, "Okay, Gary, you win. You do have more stress in your life. You do work longer hours, and you are the most damaged." I went the full body massage. Gary spent an hour on his neck and shoulders because they were bothering him so bad. So that's
Wow. Well, what happened there is you both moved out of your professions and just became old men, because
Yes.
that's what old men.
absolutely that's what we were.
Because the one thing that drives me crazy is that I now have become, and my friends have become, those people that we knew when we were young, who they get together and all they do talk about is what kind of medical issues they're going, what doctors they're seeing, and what medicines they're taking.
Yes.
And that's what happened to you just then.
Yeah, exactly.
My son said the other day, why is it that
why is it
go to the pharmacist? Go ahead, Eric.
No, I was just going to say, I have a lot of time for him, and it bothers me a little bit because more so, I think, in Canada than the United States, he's considered an enemy of hockey, and that's just false. He went to bat for the franchises in Calgary and Edmonton when they were in trouble, and worked with Harley Hotchkiss, who was a Calgary owner and the chairman of the board of governors, to develop a program because the dollar was worth about 60 cents at the time, and essentially that program saved the NHL teams in Edmonton and Calgary. So he got a lot of criticism for the moves from away from Winnipeg and Quebec, which were essentially building issues, not franchise issues. Didn't want to lose the two teams here. Helped to get the team back to Winnipeg, and even though he won't talk about expansion, understands that there are a couple of markets in Canada that could use teams, and Canada has been, the last 5 to 7 years, the economic engine that drives the National Hockey League. It wasn't always that way, and yet if you ask people across Canada, 70% will say that Gary Bettman hasn't been good for Canada, and the facts tell a different story. The facts tell a different story. Now, the other thing that Gary and I have fenced about forever is the issue of the second team in Toronto. And that has been a hobby horse of mine since I was a young journalist, because I grew up in Toronto. I'm based in Calgary now, and I have always felt that in the same way that major American markets can support more than one professional team. I mean, the New York area has 3, the Los Angeles area has 2, that Toronto could easily support a second team. And I always used, when I made my argument, the New York Mets analogy, because although there's tons of people in New York that love the Yankees, there are also tons of people in New York that hate the Yankees, and they became Mets fans. And I said, same thing in Toronto. The Leafs, they have a bulletproof brand. The Leafs will always be the Leafs. They have nothing to fear from a second team in Toronto. But if you're a hockey fan there, and they put the Toronto St. Patrick's either out of the Air Canada Centre or they build a standalone arena, there will be people that will gravitate to them. And there are people that in that market, from, like it's called the Golden Horseshoe, from Oshawa all the way down to Niagara, that cannot get to the Air Canada Centre just because there's such a limited supply of tickets. So you've got this unbelievable demand, pent up demand, and to me they're just leaving dollars on the table. And so that, respectfully, that's my argument, and has been since about '84 when I first wrote about it for the Hockey News. And his contention has always been the same thing, that that second teams in markets don't generally succeed, and it doesn't matter how strong the market is, and that they want to, they don't want to do that. And so we have gone back and forth about this over and over and over again. It was, came up during the Jim Balsillie thing when he was trying to relocate the Coyotes to Hamilton, and we just don't agree, but we have, decided that, that we can respect each other's opinions. He's not trying to get Toronto. He's just trying to preserve what he thinks is the best business model for his league, and I think that they could, make a lot of money with a second team in Toronto. And who knows what will happen, 10 years down the road, 15 years down the road. I can't see them not doing that, because that market is underserved in terms of what people there will consume of this hockey product. But he's not doing it maliciously. He just believes that that's the best thing for his business right now.
Yeah, go ahead, Kevin.
Well, I just wanted to bring up too, just sort of moving on along this way too, about revenue. On the last podcast, Eric, I think, started the discussion about the Champions League, and ultimately, and while I was at the Hall of Fame, of course, there are a lot of important folks from Europe over there, and I had several conversations about that idea. And what I discovered is that there is certainly a drumbeat in Europe to have that happen, to develop a club championship. And they don't want to come over and compete for the Stanley Cup. What they wanted to have is the Stanley Cup champion, compete against the Champions League champion, and create a whole different trophy and just another layer. And the discussion I had with them was always the same about the fact that the league is looking for ways to expand their revenue to push toward $5 billion instead of quickly they'll be to $4 billion, and then they're going to need to get to $5 billion, and the Europe's untapped, and this could be an incredible marketing opportunity, a way to get the brand over there. Obviously there are several logistical issues. When would you play it? Getting the Russians involved. Right now, that we don't know whether or not the Russians will be involved. In my opinion, you need the Russians. If it's going to be another championship, you got to have them involved in that. And trying to figure out when to play that is, obviously their season is well over by the time the Stanley Cup is done. And the KHL starts in September. So now, are we into August? What kind of shape would the Stanley Cup champions be? But the revenue potential of that would be enormous, I think. There's the television rights of that, and for the first time ever, I think there would be interest in the United States in that. That's one of the real benefits, I think, of the NBC Sports Network is, they've sort of created a greater interest in hockey as sort of a mainstream. That's a flag carrier of that network. So
they've done a great job with it. They really have.
No, they really have. So anyway, I just want to bring that up because on the last podcast that came up, and I thought that generated a lot of interest.
I like it. I think we should talk about that. I also wrote down on a piece of paper here that we are going to have next week's discussion about a second team in Toronto, because that is a full debate. I love that debate.
Yeah.
And people love to talk about that too. Obviously, that's a no-brainer for us. So we should definitely talk about that. And I want to talk about this championship league. And by the way, this is the Cranky HockeyWriters show. I'm just going to introduce this now because we just keep this whole show as part of the feed because it's been great. This is Kevin Allen of USA Today and Eric DeHashik of the Globe and Mail, and we get together once a week to sort of fix the hockey world. And today we're going to be talking about some funny stories. We're going to talk about the Champion League, and we're also going to talk about the fact that we've already fixed 2 problems apparently that they listened to and they fixed. So we're, if you remember a few shows ago,
dry
scrape should not happen, and we decided that they should. And I sat on here and pitched the fact that they should stop the game if a goal. Remember this whole thing? So both of which they're going to do. So I think, and all I can say is it's because Eric used us as part of his introduction of Kevin at the end. Bill Daly and Gary Bettman must have watched it, gone back and said, we got to fix this. And
so, I don't think Gary's got a 15-minute increment for our show. Sorry. You'd have to give up 4 of them. Yeah.
It's weird because these are 2 things we talked about at length.
I know, yeah.
Let's
pick up on what Kevin just said about schedule of the Champions League, because I was trying to figure out a way of doing it, and I think what you want is you want a competitive fairness, and I can think of a great solution, but it wouldn't be competitively fair, which is that if the Champions League is going to have to push more towards the NHL, then the NHL will push towards the Champions League to make this happen. So I think that they're prepared to suspend play. Europe has a tradition of having international breaks in the schedule, and so there are ways that they could bring their champion to North America that would make that's easier than having the National Hockey League champion go over and play in Europe. So if you did it in September, and instead of having a regular exhibition season, let's say the Chicago Blackhawks win the 2015 Stanley Cup, well, instead of scheduling, a 7-game exhibition season, the Chicago Blackhawks exhibition season would be playing against Jokerit, Finland, who are the Champions League team, or maybe a 3-game series, or within the context of the NHL exhibition season. Maybe towards the end of it, the Blackhawks have had a couple of games under their belt. They put their young kids in the lineup. They're ready to start playing Kane and Taves again, ready to have Duncan Keith go in, ready to have Corey Crawford start some games, and then you would have a best-of-3 series, and that would be your whatever trophy we're prepared to give, the Bunny Ahern Trophy, to the winner of the Stanley Cup and the Champions League. You would still have the problem of the Champions League team, because they start so much earlier in Europe. They would be closing in on mid-season form, and the NHL team would be just getting barely out of training camp form. So there would be a decided edge to the Champions League team, and potentially they could win. And I don't think the National Hockey League would like that. It's the same way as Joe Namath and the Jets coming in and actually winning the Super Bowl. It lent credibility to the AFL. So I think the Champions League would embrace that sort of a thing. I honestly cannot think of another time that you could do it, because the hockey schedule is so crowded right now. They're talking about, the reason we haven't heard about a World Cup schedule yet is that they're trying to come up with a schedule for 12 years down the road. They just don't want to say we're playing the World Cup in 2016. Everybody knows that's on board. It's trying to figure out, are we involved in the Olympics? Aren't we involved in the Olympics? Where does the European initiative lead us? And until they can sort of get it clearer in their own minds how they want this process to unfold, even through this current CBA, I don't think we're going to have an announcement. So that's my best idea of how you get it done. It's not great, but it's the best that I can come up with.
Yeah, and that's one of the certainly what was talked about when I was talking with the folks from Europe about it all. But the one thing that I think makes this a little easier is the fact that over the last 20 years, players have gotten themselves in much better shape than ever before. I mean, the idea, and this came up obviously during the lockout, and I'm sure Eric did the same story I did, where you went around and said, all right, what do you really need to get ready to play? And it was pretty consistent from all the players, and that is, look, we're in shape all year round. It's just a matter of timing, getting in game shape. And almost all of them said, I like 2 to 3 games. And then, I feel, now it's not perfect, but they feel like they're in good shape and at least have their timing down if they have 2 or 3 exhibition games. So, if you could work that and make it a little bit better. Now, again, it's not ideal, because I think as the season progresses, you get sharper. The argument will be about injuries. What if they lose key players in this what is still sort of an exhibition championship? But my argument would be you could lose them playing an exhibition game too, and the competition will be more intense. But I think this would work. Certainly the fans in Canada would take to this. And I think American fans would like it too. It's a very significant piece of it, and it could become an important piece of the season. And international hockey still works. We like rooting against other countries. It's just kind of who we are and what we're about as a society. So I think there's a lot of potential.
It's true. I'm going to play devil's advocate on this one now, because I'm not so sure. I am definitely all for the World Cup of Hockey. Because that to me is nationalist. Again, you have the whole kind of countries. There's an old saying in business that you never partner with someone who can gain more from your partnership than you can gain from theirs. And my curiosity here is, who is really gaining from the League of Champions? If I'm the NHL, I'm going to sit there and I'm going to say, well, they are gaining far more than we are. I mean, we don't have much to lose. We don't have. I mean, we have more to lose in this, and they are getting way more exposure to the Champion League. Perhaps in the future, players who would have come over to the NHL could stay in Europe now, or stay in Russia, or stay in Finland or Sweden, and it really is, because the NHL is the way more powerful entity. It's a little bit like Google, partnering with some small search engine somewhere, and Google doesn't do that, and I'm just throwing, and that's just my 2 cents on this. I don't see the upside really for the NHL in this thing. Eric?
The upside is financial. I mean, you're right. The NHL has the most to lose in terms of face, so that's one part of the equation, because they can, they have the best brand in the world. Everybody that comes to the National Hockey League believes that the NHL is the place to play. So what would happen if, for example, Färjestad from Sweden suddenly beat the Chicago Blackhawks? Does that mean that Färjestad is on par with the Chicago Blackhawks? No, it doesn't. It means that they were more prepared, and they happened to win a best-of-3 series, and the next Henrik Lundqvist is probably coming out of Sweden, and he stood on his head and played great in those games. I just think that, and Kevin made a reference to this earlier in the podcast, that the National Hockey League is constantly trying to find ways of expanding its revenues. It is a partnership with the players. So that's why the Players Association is involved in these negotiations, and they understand that Europe is a a genuine hockey market that they have largely left alone. They have not tapped it. They've played those games at the start of the season, but they can go further in Europe. Asia, much further down the road, is also going to be a market that they're interested in. So they understand that if you have a world game, you have to grow your game around the world. And I think that they are prepared to put that face question at risk, because I think that they know themselves nothing will change for the players. The destination will always be the National Hockey League. If the next Victor Hedman comes out of Sweden and is drafted second overall by the Tampa Bay Lightning, and they offer him, the maximum salary cap, he'll be in their lineup as soon as he can be. I cannot see that changing very much for very many players. So I think that the league would weigh those two things and decide, no, the revenue potential for being in Europe and ultimately Asia is worth the fact that that maybe a little bit of our credibility or our position as the #1 brand in the market might be cracked a little bit.
So by revenue potential, you're saying more along the lines of, okay, there's we're just increasing our brand. More people are going to be aware of the NHL in Europe. See, I don't think that's the case. I think any hockey fan in Europe who's watching these teams is already well aware of the NHL. I don't think you're getting a big bump there. I do think that if eventually your goal is to expand the NHL into Europe and say, okay, this Champion League is part of the NHL, then okay, if this is going to be if Europe and Russia are basically the WHA, years ago, and we're going to have 5 or 6 teams come out of there, that's eventually another story. But I don't see the revenue potential or the expansion potential in terms of just brand identity.
Yeah, well, I said last week, or I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, that you were saying, what does hockey look like in 2050? And I said, there'll be NHL North America, there'll be NHL Europe, and maybe there'll be NHL Asia, and there will be like one body, probably out of New York, that runs these leagues. And I think that ultimately, is where the business is going. Not in our working lifetimes, but eventually. And so anything that you do to work towards that model of having, a division in Europe, I mean, who knows? Airplane travel might be so sophisticated that it is it's like the Concorde. It's a 4-hour flight from Paris to New York. Suddenly, the miles go away. If you can fly in 100 years or 50 years in 2 hours from Paris to New York, it changes the whole model of professional sport.
Right.
I mean, right now the biggest gap is the Atlantic Ocean. It's difficult to overcome the Atlantic Ocean and the time zone change between the NHL and Europe. So they're kind of stuck where they are right now. But I think that they know that if they can just make the brand better, if they can create more awareness, if they sell it to television. I mean, think about soccer. The Champions League in soccer. When I was a kid, I didn't know about it. Now I see it on every cable channel. We send people to cover it, to write about it when there's a game on television. Oh, Wayne Rooney had a historic goal in the Champions League. It went from something that was kind of important to a handful of people to something that's important to everybody, and they see that and they say, wow, our sport is not soccer, but we have interest in so many different places around the world. Can we do a lighter version of that? And if we can, there's television contracts, there's ways of monetizing it. They may not know themselves how to actually monetize the concept, but they know if they can grow it, if they can turn it into something bigger, somebody's going to make a few dollars out of it, and 50% of that money will end up in the player's pocket.
Yeah, Kevin, your thoughts?
That's the point. I think you're looking at it as a finite potential, saying, well, how much can they grow financially? And I think it's limitless. And the comparison I would make, even though it is different, but there's some sameness to it, and this, you need to be older to remember this, is the NFL and the AFL and the creation of the Super Bowl. Now, everybody who looked at that back then said, well, the NFL has everything to lose and the AFL has nothing to lose. They were the smaller league. And then when the AFL won, everybody just said, wow, you just gave them credibility. But, that's not what really happened. You created a game and you created an interest in that game that, turned out to life its own. Now the Super Bowl. Now nobody probably, fans or journalists, never understood the potential of the Super Bowl. And I think That's what the point Eric and I are making. We don't know what's out there now, but we do know if you engage in this, if you get involved, who knows, how it could work out. And I disagree. I think this could create, more interest. I mean, we already have a world championship in hockey, but this will be a world club championship. And I think it actually could, if a team from Finland could win this, could beat an NHL team, I think it could create a lot of interest in this, and who knows what it could lead to. I just think you do this because of the unknown and the unlimited potential of what could happen, and I just don't see any downside to it. It's not going to take away from the Stanley Cup. This is just another layer that'll do, and I don't see a downside to it.
I think my heart is more with you than against you here. But I think that I'm looking at the NHL side of it. I love the European Soccer Cup. I love that. I was in Marseille, and when they basically did this in the middle of the year, they just shut down, and suddenly Marseille was playing European teams. And I said, well, what happened to their regular schedule? Like, no, this is just the European Cup, and that just had happened, and it was fantastic. I went to a couple games, and I loved it. And I mean, time zone is definitely a bigger issue to me than the ocean. The ocean, because flight travels are getting faster, and because of Twitter, there's nothing, you can't delay anything, you can't possibly hide things. I have a friend who's actually working on an app, and then has it out now, I believe, so I could talk about it. But it's designed specifically for this kind of purpose, where it's a Twitter app that you basically type in, these are things I don't want to hear about yet. And it'll go through and block anything connected to that event. So you can still go through Twitter without having any knowledge of it. And you can say, I don't want to hear about that till this time, because you know when you're going to watch the game. And then you can actually set it up so that, say you're interested in a Calgary Flames Edmonton game and you just can't watch that game, but you say, I'm going to watch this game now. So when you go into the app, you say, I'm starting that game now, and suddenly tweets in sequential order, timed to when they happened in the game, would begin coming to you. So you'd be able to follow what people were saying about the game in real time, and that to me is an awesome thing. And that's where you have to go if people want to have that two-screen experience of watching a game and watching something on Twitter at the same time. But saying all that, I think that part of what made the Super Bowl so great is because you had that, the Jets thing, you had the miracle thing happen there. You need one of those in this. You need
Well, eventually you will get it. I mean, it may not happen in the first year, it may not happen in the third year, but whatever they call that event, 9 or 13 or something, somebody is going to do it. There'll be a goaltender on the Finnish team, or
it has to be Finland. Finland's the only one who can pull it off.
Yeah. Every team in the National Hockey League, no matter how poor they are, win. The Buffalo Sabres, as much as they've struggled, find ways of beating the San Jose Sharks. It just happens, and you're right. And then all of a sudden everything will change when that occurs.
And who knows? I mean, if it's Peter Forsberg owns and runs a team at some point, and there could be a storyline there. I mean, you just never know, but you will never know if you don't try it.
No, exactly, and there's no reason not to try it, really. But I wonder, from a business perspective, I could see the NHL. They could see the arguments that I'm making coming up. Like what are we getting out of this again? Unless they're sitting back and really chasing the long tail and saying, okay, this is going to be, we're going to do this for 10 years, and after 10 years, we're going to see whether or not we can make some sort of deal with them to merge them, and then have money and have the money come back and have the whole thing together. And if the fear would be that you would have a team from Europe that everybody in Europe thinks is a great team because they watch them all the time. They come over here and then lose to the Stanley Cup champion like 9-1 or something like that. That to me is the fear. Now I think certain teams that might happen too. I think the reason I say the Finnish team is because they play such good defense that they could trap the hell out of anybody, and it could be a good game. But I think head to head, if you throw a Russian team over that's say the Russian version of the Chicago Blackhawks, they'll get destroyed in my mind. I don't know. That's just.
Well, yeah, for sure. But sooner or later, as Eric said, and I believe that too, someone will win. I mean, and it doesn't really matter that the competition isn't as good. The best indication to me is the KHL isn't as good as KHL officials think it is the fact that when the top KHL players have come over here and have done really well over there, they're not instant successes over here. I mean, Kuznetsov obviously was a successful player in Russia, Tarasenko was as well. But it took them time once they got over here, and it's not all just the size of the rink. Just the competition is faster over here. It's it's just more challenging than what they faced before. But ultimately, a hot goalie, a team being on the run, injuries for the NHL team, and we've seen it in the playoffs. We'll see it in that point too, and that will change everything.
Yeah, I agree. I do hope it happens. I really do. I think that the people who are, it seems like the people who are pushing for it, who are part of this concept, are really good people and have a good perspective on it. And I'd love to see it happen. I think it would be great. So before we get into some fun stories, man, this show goes so friggin' fast. Before we get into some fun stories, which I do want to do, because part of the original topic I sent out to these guys today was, let's just tell some of the stories. I mean, hanging out at this event was just incredibly fun to hear stories. Bob Duff had some great stories too. Sitting next to him was a blast. And Eric had great stories, and my wife said to me, "Yep, I totally get it. I get why you love Eric DeHashek. I get it." She's like, "You guys are like peas in a pod. You, Kevin, and Eric should be doing a show together. This makes all the sense in the world. You're going to take over the world." You guys had some great stories, which she loved to hear too. But I do want to touch briefly on the concept of us fixing the NHL, because we did already fix 2 things, and I want to see what we're going to fix next. But we talked before about the NHL not moving quickly on things, guys, and this is kind of a little bit, like we'd have to test it. They're getting rid of 2 things. They're changing 2 things in midstream. This is a little bit unheard of, Kevin.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's not the way they normally do business, but this was one. The dry scrape like that. There's no butterfly effect here. You know what I mean? Like, usually when we're talking about changes where you're making rule changes that are going to impact other aspects of the game, and you really got to think it through. And that's actually, I admire the NHL for that, because it is complicated. The minute you start allowing players to do something, it affects one thing or another aspect of the game. In this case, what we're just talking about is robbing the game of its momentum going into overtime. And, that's something that was easily fixed, and, they did that. We've just started that, but it turns out that they have anecdotal evidence that people are leaving. Mm-hmm. Certainly you don't want that. Right. Plus, you can just sense it. You can feel it. Those of us who've been at the game, it just takes too long. We want to get right into it and attack it. So, it made a lot of sense, and I applaud them for, doing that, quickly.
It felt like you were peering behind the fourth wall during that period of time. It felt like the players shouldn't be on the ice looking around and staring at each other. It lost its whole thing. It did lose a little bit of it's like, wow, this is a great game, and then the players looking at the ice girls and all this stuff, and the guys trying to stretch. They should go to the locker room, come back, or something. Something else should happen. They shouldn't be there. It was too awkward. It was like watching them tune their guitars or something. And to me, it was completely, for an exorbitant amount of time. Eric, your thoughts?
Well, just to riff off that, I mean, the television networks, the first couple of times it happened, weren't really ready. So, more recently, they've realized, okay, this is going to take a long time, so everybody just goes right back to the studio, and you have like a 5-minute conversation, and then they eventually, drag you back to the rink. But in the beginning, it was like, okay, we're going to get started, and you got this picture of the snake going round and round, and they're really filling, and it was like, you could almost tell. I often think that so many of these decisions are driven by television. And, I mean, everything Kevin said is exactly right. That's exactly how I feel about it. But in terms of the impetus for these changes, I would suggest that the television networks also had a hand in it, because it was one of the things. I sit there with my clicker every night and watch the games, and after the first of these games where there's the dry scrape, it's like, this is taking forever. I don't have the patience as a viewer to there. I've got 9 other games that I can go to, or I can watch 8 minutes of the NBC Nightly News during the time this is going on. I'm off that channel, and that is death, right? If you're if you've paid all of the money that Rogers has paid in Canada, that the NBC Sports Group has paid, you don't want somebody sitting there doing this. And I'm sure that the television powers that be could just feel those clickers across North America moving off to somebody else because of the dry scrape. So I would suggest that they went to the league and said, this isn't working, and the league said, yep, it isn't working. And that, like when all of the interested parties are the same mind about it. Players didn't like it because they were getting cold. I was waiting for somebody to be on an exercise bike, throw the skates off, stay warm, throw the skates back on. I mean, it really was coming to that, and so that to me made it an easy fix. It's an intelligent fix. Kenny Holland fell on the sword yesterday, I guess, and said, "Yeah, my idea." He's had lots and lots of good ideas, and this idea was simply something that he thought was going to be good for the game. The fact that it didn't work out, it's like let's can it. So good for them.
Yeah, yeah. Now the other one, of course, is the rule that we talked about before as well. That if they know it's a goal and the play is continuing on, that they can call down and stop the play, which I am so happy about because, like I said, last year, especially when we get down to cup final situations and stuff like that, there was so much potential for a disaster in this one that I think that they realized it, and it is one of those things that there was no logic behind continuing to play if you knew it was a goal. So that was a great call for sure. I think we all are in agreement with that one.
Yeah, I don't know what you can add to that. I mean, that's just that when you're doing the right thing, then you really have no debate, right? So
yeah, and I give the NHL credit for one thing, Kevin, and that as opposed to like baseball and other sports, that they are not afraid to try things and they're not afraid to admit it was wrong in this case, which is good. Of course, the trapezoid is still there, but yeah, they do admit that they're still going with this one, right? So.
Well, yeah, and I think the key is obviously you just make sure you have enough time to get it right. That you don't rush through it to stop the play. That isn't the impetus. To stop the play. First you get it right, and then if it takes 3 minutes, well then the play goes on. So, and I think obviously they've been doing this enough with video review for long enough now that they will do that. But sometimes it does take. It's not like it's going to happen in 30 seconds every time. Some of these decisions. I watched a game last night on a kicked-in puck. It took them a while to get it right, and I think there are other instances like that. So as long as they don't hurry their decision with the idea that getting the play stopped is the most important aspect of it, and I don't think they would. I want to bring up one other point, though. I'm kind of coming around on 3-on-3. We've talked about this a little bit before.
Yeah.
I'm worried about that being, feel contrived to me as well because we don't see much 3-on-3.
Right.
And the basis of hockey is a shooter versus goal.
Right.
So at least we have the basis of hockey, and I was afraid it was just going to be, and we see even 4-on-4, it's a series of sort of odd man breaks, and
right.
When there's only 3 out there, there's going to be some 2-on-1s, and to me that feels like a goalie has no chance at all. I think a 2-on-1 to me, as opposed to 1-on-1, it seems like the goalie has no chance on those. But the 80% that's going on in the AHL of getting those results in 3-on-3, if the numbers I saw were accurate, I mean that's pretty stunning. And I think it'll accomplish what I've talked about in the past as well, which will then, we're not going to limit shootouts. It's going to make them more fun because we're not going to see them very often.
Yeah.
So when you do get a shootout now, if it works the same way in the NHL, then those will become more fun, and we'll see a lot of odd man rushes because that's what you get in 3-on-3. You'll go up the ice and get your 2-on-1. They'll either stop it and score, and then you're going to go back the other way 2-on-1. So it'll be interesting.
If you were to ask the members of the Goaltenders Union, what would you rather have, facing those shooters in that kind of contrived situation, or the fact that you would have all these 2-on-1s and 3-on-3? Every single one of those guys would tell you they would rather play the 3-on-3 and face the higher quality shots that you obviously will give up as a team defensively in those situations, rather than having to do the shootout. I haven't met a goalie yet that when he's telling you the truth likes it. They shake their heads. It's part of the job. They understand that it's part of the job. A lot of the younger goaltenders coming up have faced shootouts all the way through, so it's not like Marty Brodeur. He played in an era where there were ties, and then there was overtime, and suddenly there's a shootout, and then it's like you have to learn a new skill. You stop 3 penalty shots or more depending on the night. In the middle of a career, that's challenging, but. And 3-on-3 is something that I've been promoting for a long time. Love it. We play shinny hockey here all the time. Often it's 3-on-3. There's tactics involved in 3-on-3 that good coaches would be able to explore. You would have 2 forwards and 1 defenseman sometime. I think that it would be fun. And if you had the way the AHL is doing it, 4 minutes of 4-on-4, 4 on 3-on-3, then the shootout, you have a and that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to provide a complete entertainment experience for the fans, and so I think that would just add one more thing.
Yeah, and what goalies tell me too is the one-on-one seems like, or the shootout seems like it's me deciding the game.
Yeah.
The goalie, and at least the 3-on-3, it's still the team. If I'm giving up that goal on a 2-on-1, it still feels like it's a team. There was a failure in the offensive end to create the odd man rush. The defenseman either made the right decision or the wrong decision, and I didn't get the puck. But when it's just the shootout, it's the shooter and the goalie. It just feels to the goalie like I'm deciding it one way or the other. So.
I really do wonder what you said before, though, Kevin. If there is going to be a gaming this system 3-on-3, the aspect to it, though, because if you're not going to go deep, you're not going to take the puck deep. You're going to get, there's going to be a situation there where you're going to have to be very careful about that. And I think that you'll have that gaming the system thing as well.
Well, the only thing I would say to that, though, Ek, is that that the era that might have happened and has passed in the National Hockey League, most of the coaches are playing such an attacking style that I think that they would try to be finding ways of winning. Coaches, as a group, don't like the randomness of the shootout. They feel that you can, when you get to the shootout, they legitimately feel it's a flip of the coin. You could have the far better scoring team, but if the team that you're playing against has young players come up that have the moves, you don't know who the stars of the shootout are going to be. It's not always going to be the people that jump to mind. Steven, it takes a while before Steven Stamkos comes up in the shootout in Tampa. The Sedins never get to shoot in Vancouver. I mean, they have other players that do that. So that's the thing that drives them crazy. They would rather devise a game plan to win what they would say win the game legitimately rather than holding back. I mean, the best example to me of what the system you're talking about is 4-on-4 shootout came up at the Hall of Fame this weekend, the 1998 game in the semifinals between Canada and the Czech Republic. It was clear that there was one team playing to win, Canada, and there was one team playing to get to the shootout, the Czech Republic. The ice was tilted the entire way. The entire overtime period, the Czechs were backing up, trapping. They just wanted to make sure they didn't give up a goal because they felt that when they got to the shootout, they had as good a chance as anyone. They knew that they weren't the better team, but they felt that they had 5 guys that they could trot out that would be the equal of the 5 guys that Canada would trot out. So I think that's absolutely wrong, and I don't think you get that in the National Hockey League. I think the coaches would absolutely, they would be devising systems of play, but it would be to create seams, to create openings, to create scoring chances for their team so they wouldn't have to get to the shootout. The whole point of having the conversation is they don't want to go to the shootout. It's too random. So I'm not nearly as fearful of that as you are.
So why are we going to 4-on-4 at all? I'm going to throw that out there right now. Like, if this is the point, if everybody wants, if we want, I get that we're going to do this. Why do we do this?
4-on-4 is entertaining. Games are decided in 4-on-4. There are different tactics to 4-on-4. Calgary played Anaheim last night here in Calgary. The first 2 periods were a snore-a-thon. Nothing much happened. It got going in the 3rd period. The overtime saved the game. I mean, there was scoring chances galore. Great opportunities. Goalies made. It was the 4-on-4 overtime. It didn't decide the game. They ended up having to go to a shootout. But when the fans left that building, they felt that they were entertained. Why? Because the 3rd period was good, the overtime was good, and the home team won. But if the game had been called after 40 minutes, there'd be a whole lot of people walking out of there shaking their hands saying, I'm not coming back. So 4-on-4 is entertaining. I think 3-on-3 will be entertaining in a different way. And Kevin's point that if the shootout is not as common as it is right now, if it returns to being that novelty thing that it was when it first came in, then it'll be like, hey, we haven't seen a shootout all year. Let's see what happens. That's the kind of thing. If it's like, hey, here's the 10th shootout, if we get to the parking lot now, we can hear who won, and we can still, beat the traffic, and you don't want that. So this system that we're talking about, I think, would return the novelty aspect to the shootout, which is when most people enjoyed it the most. I agree, Kevin.
Yeah, no, that's why I'm coming around a little bit on it. I just see it as though there's a lot of parts to it. As Eric said, I wouldn't go 3-on-3. I would go 4-on-4 and then 3-on-3, just because you want to decide the game as close as you can to the way we play the game all the time. And 4-on-4 is closer to that than 3-on-3. So let's try to solve it in that way. And what's wrong with going a couple extra minutes? I think in overtime. You've gone that long. That's really not going to make a difference. What we have all noted, I think, is these overtime periods go pretty quickly. The puck doesn't go flying out of the rink. You start it, and the next thing you know, it's like you're looking, it's like, God, there's only a minute left.
Right.
So they're usually up and down, and I agree that we've seen guys pushing the pace, or coaches pushing the pace on those, because generally they're trying to get that point, because a lot of them are fearful. A lot of good teams are fearful of the shootout now, because it's become a gimmick that some teams are very good at and some are not. I mean, I live in Detroit. Everybody in this city despises the shootout because the Red Wings aren't any good at it.
Yeah.
And you know what? They despise it in New Jersey as well.
And they despise it in Philly too. Philly, that's no different. I mean, they dread it. I mean, go to the shootout, I can immediately get text, we're done from all of my friends watching the Flyers. I'm going to throw out something at the end here, of course, that's going to be crazy and ridiculous, but I wanted to throw it out there just, because then we're going to have to tell funny stories another time, because, again, we have managed to fill up an hour very quickly.
Well, some of these stories were funny, weren't they? Come on.
They were very good. They were. So watch the beginning of the show if you came just for the funny stories, and, of course, and I think, yes, indeed, Eric, we should be funny at times. But here's my thought, okay? One of the things I hate about soccer is there is no clock, right? I hate the fact that there's no clock. It makes me crazy. I want to go to these soccer games, how much time's left. And I've been a soccer coach now for about 5 years, and once I still say that the girls have to forecheck better. Things like that, they're still I still get yelled at. Forecheck? What do you mean? Yeah, so we had to keep the ball in, the puck in. But here's my thing that I do like about this, that I think NHL should consider with their overtimes. Maybe overtime doesn't end until the puck's in the neutral zone. Maybe, and this is taking something out of soccer, okay? Maybe when we have overtime, if a team's going in there and manages to get into the zone, we give them a chance to finish the play like they do in soccer. They don't blow the whistle in soccer until the puck is, until the ball has been cleared out. You'll never see a rush, you never see a guy miss, because the clock ran out when the shot was in midair. You'll never see that in soccer, right? Maybe overtime could take something of that. I don't know if you have to just clear it or you have to skate it over the blue line or something to end the game, but if you're under pressure at the end of the game, you have to kill it off. What do you think about that, Kevin?
Well, that's interesting, but as in the cases with all of your ideas, it is kind of fascinating, because I lived in the soccer world. My wife was a high school coach for 20 years. All my kids play. One of the things that really sort of I find so amusing is the referee at the end of the game who's staring at his watch, and you're watching the game yourself. You know what time it started, and it's beyond the time. And my kids all made money by being soccer referees, and I always told them, out of fear for their lives, if you're watching your watch and the game is going on and somebody scores a goal, that you always go get the ball out of the net. You never blow a whistle or end the game as soon as it goes. You take it, you put the ball back at center and let them kick off at least, and stare at your watch and then let it go and then call it. So there's no debate over whether or not the thing ended on time or not. But I know what you're saying, and I could see that being discussed, but I think that would be the kind of thing you'd have to study a little bit. I don't know that we could just say off the top of our heads, but I will say this: that one's intriguing.
Okay. Eric?
Well, I'm rejecting you completely out of hand.
Okay, thank you.
I like the. I think that it creates too many other nebulous areas. And you said them yourself. Do you have to clear the puck out of the zone? Well, what happens? Okay, so what happens if the play is in the zone and and pressure is being put on and the clock has officially run out, but I stick my stick in the middle, intercept a pass between the two defensemen. Now I'm going on a breakaway, leaving the zone.
Right.
Okay, so I've cleared the puck out of into the neutral zone but now I've got 100 feet straight to the net, and that's a scoring chance. So right. At what point, what are you going to do? Blow the whistle down as I cross the center ice? I'm coming back and I'm tackling you, Ack. I'm tackling you. I don't mind it the way it is right now. Kevin's right; it's intriguing, but no.
No, I don't mind. I mean, I like it that way. I was just trying to be nice.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate it. They were just
Lost, as we say.
just be appeased. So yeah, so we'll so Eric, Eric, what do you got going on at the Globe and Mail these days?
Well, I'm doing a lot of football this week because the team in Calgary, the Calgary Stampeders, are playing in the Western Conference Final on Sunday against the Edmonton Eskimos. Great rivalry. It was a rivalry before the Oilers and the Flames were a rivalry, and they really were the two best teams in the CFL this year. So in a lot of ways, for the championship of Canadian football, we have a very similar situation to what happened in the NHL, where Chicago and Los Angeles met in the semifinals, and everyone thought that was the final. The two teams in the East that are playing, Hamilton and Montreal, have both improved in the second half, but they're really not that good. And so whoever happens to win the game here in the West will be the heavy favorite to go and win the Grey Cup. So I'll be, as soon as we're off the air, I'll be heading over to McMahon Stadium and interviewing John Cornish, the great running back of the Stampeders, and just doing rivalry stories on football instead of rivalry stories on hockey this week.
Awesome. What do you have, Kevin?
I'm actually going to do a piece on both Glenn Sather and David Poyler, reaching milestones in terms of number of wins as general manager, and I find it just fascinating that they've done it with completely different styles. David Poyle has kind of chugged along with wins, hasn't been able to have the ultimate success. Well, Slats has been sort of feast or famine. Obviously in the early days, and with Edmonton, they won a lot of games and a lot of championships, and with the Rangers, he's been exalted at times, and I think there are other times when fans thought it would be time to get a new GM. So I'm going to sort of try to get a hold of both of those guys and talk to them about their careers and sort of compare them.
That's a good story. I'm a big Sather's such an enigma type of person. I love that story. That's a good one. And I'm looking forward to the Canadian Football League. My wife had a lot of questions about Canadian Football League this past weekend. We watched a game at a bar, and so there was a lot of questions I wanted to ask you, but I'll have to ask you at another time. But guys, so you can follow Eric at @e.hotchick on Twitter, and you can follow Kevin at @ByKevinAllen on Twitter, and please do follow them because they're really worth a good follow. If you're going to follow anyone in hockey, you should be following those guys. Remember, guys, without the buzz, it is just hockey. We'll see you next week.